We would enter the room. Each of the tables had a very cute girl at it, which I think was part of desensitizing us to the peculiarity. We would get earphones, headphones that they would place on our heads after the drops. They had what I believe is called a tachistoscope. It's a device that we would look into. So we would enter this room, and there'd be girls from the other school, and they'd have their blouses off. And I believe at that point that we were getting involved in some sort of show.
Stargate is something that I've been hearing a lot about, and I see people when Stargate gets brought up, and I see a lot of this. I don't think people know what Stargate is. I don't know what Stargate is. So could you give us a quick brief on what the Stargate program is?
The Stargate program, from my understanding, and I'm still doing a lot of research into it because it's very prevalent in our community and impacting our children, so it's very important that people understand that. The Stargate program, as I experienced it, was I would get removed from the standard curriculum classroom in my grammar school and would be brought to the library. At the time, they weren't really explaining to us what was going on. It was just very bizarre to me. In my research since then, I've discovered that it was the Robert Monroe Institute's protocols for remote viewing that we were being trained in and utilized as remote viewing teams to gather intel for whoever was the faction that was functioning us. It is my belief that it was the CIA, but I don't have documentation to prove which faction was wielding us. There's a lot of factions out there, as I'm sure you know, and I wish I could verify which faction. I just can follow CIA paperwork that has been released that shows that they were associated to these programs. So until I can find anything else, I will lay it at the feet of the CIA and the U.S. federal government, that they were experimenting on us as children. They were training us in things. I was given eye drops, unbeknownst to my parents, which I'm sure any parent out there would be furious to hear this was happening to their child. And it's my understanding that it was some sort of hybrid LSD that was very fast acting as well as fast wearing off. What I can give as a symptom of my experience was that after our 45-minute-ish sessions, where we would go through the protocols and do a viewing and gather intel, I remember as a child that I liked to try to expediently leave the library because I was aware of I guess you would say a side effect, that I could exit the library and we had large ceiling-to-floor south-facing windows. And on a sunny day when I exited the library, there was this leftover effect on my eyes that it was like wearing yellow sunglasses. So the whole world had become yellow, and it would wear off relatively rapidly. So I had to try to be expedient in exiting to gain the effect, which as a child I thought was cool. But I didn't realize what was going on at the time.
What age did this start?
I would say that this probably started, I would say, around first grade and went through my years in grammar school, I would say, up until about 7th or 8th grade, that these situations would occur in the library.
What would happen in the library?
For starters, they had it all blacked out. They had all the windows were covered with large curtains. It was extremely dark. We would enter the room. Each of the tables had a very cute girl at it, which I think was part of, desensitizing us to the peculiarity. I remember being very attracted to the girls that were at the table. They would administer the eye drops. They would tell me to lean back, make sure to stay still, don't stain your uniform, which, made sense as a kid, and we just did what we were told. I had no idea that anything that was going on wasn't approved. It was a different environment back then. My parents were sending me to this school. I just presumed that this was all on the up and up.
Did you tell your parents about this at all?
I've spoken to my father since this, and he's furious.
What age did you tell your father?
A year ago.
So you didn't tell your parents from first grade to 8th grade?
I didn't know it was wrong.
You didn't know it was wrong? How many people were pulled out of class?
In my experience, there would have probably been maybe 8 to 10 kids in that room with me.
What would happen after the eye drops?
We would go into what I now know is a remote viewing protocol. We would do an ideogram. We would draw a line on the table, and they would have us put pen to the line. They would ask us questions, say things like, do you see mountains or do you see water? They would say all the time, say anything you want. Don't think too hard. Whatever answer you say is correct. which blew my mind because I was in a very old school German-Irish community, Catholic school. I mean, there was right answers and there was wrong answers. So for them to tell me just answer whatever you want and it's correct was bizarro world to me. It didn't make any sense. I used to think that every time I entered that library, I had to wrap my head around that everything that's going to happen in here it's not going to make sense. It doesn't make sense. I was a little kid. I couldn't make sense of it, so I didn't try. I went through the motions. I did what they said. It was my understanding, the feedback that I was getting from them is whatever we were doing, I was very good at it.
Are you a remote viewer now?
I would say that I don't practice those protocols. I have delved into them to check, and it scared the crap out of me that I had dead reckoning. There were certain hemisync programs from the Monroe Institute. When I started to listen to them again, I knew them verbatim. I wasn't hearing for the first time, and I remembered it from my childhood. I said, this is what they were playing for us. We would get headphones that they would place on our heads after the drops. They had what I believe is called a tachistoscope. It's a device that we would look into, and they would run these movies. And it's my understanding that there was flashes of information embedded in the movie, and then there would be questions about what was being put on the screen. And I remember this very clearly. The movie would play, and then the screen would black out, and you had to give an answer, and there was almost like a cross that broke the screen into 4 quadrants. Everything was written in yellow. I remember that part. It may have something to do with the drops. But there would be 4 answers in each quadrant, and you would look at a quadrant, and it would read what you were looking at and register the answer. And I remember just being blown away as a kid, like how I was just so focused on how does this machine do that? How is it possible? But that's what it was doing.
What do you? Could you?
I was looking into something, and the movie would play, and it would ask you. It would prompt you to answer a question. The answers were on the screen. I wasn't doing anything with my hands. I wasn't saying anything. We were directed to look with intention at the answer, one of the 4 answers, and it would register your answer when you looked at it.
No shit.
Correct.
How would it register the answer?
I have no idea, but I was intrigued by it. I was trying to figure out how it did that.
How do you know it registered the answer?
It would give some, thank you and move on to the next thing. Like it just knew that you looked at the thing. I wish I knew, but this is what intrigued me at the time. I had no idea how it was accomplishing it, but it blew my mind that it was doing it.
Looking back, do you know what they were doing?
I just only understand that the technology exists right now that makes it very easy to do that. I couldn't explain the technology now, but I'm sure that there's all kinds of science folk and IT folks that can tell you, reading where your retina is pointing at is very simple. I just think that it would be far-fetched in the 1980s for people to consider that technology existed then.
I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think the point of it was?
Oh, I think that from what my understanding was, the tachistoscope system was a way to subliminally program people, that it functioned that way. They were programming us with that device.
What do you think the question was?
Oh, it was relative to the film being shown.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what are they trying to tap into? What would a question be?
Well, I think it was more pertinent, like you said, what are they trying to tap into? And the answer would be consciousness and subconsciousness. So I think they were trying to make a distinction between how they could teach you consciously and subconsciously.
Okay.
I think that's what the device was.
Programming.
Correct.
Programming the human brain.
Yes.
What other kind of exercises would be done?
Well, outside of that room, I would say there was, we would go on retreats to other facilities under the pretense that it was, dealing with the religious aspect of our education. But the same group that I was with, we would get peeled off and brought, I guess you would say, to the back end of facilities. These are old mansions on Long Island. Former Brady family was one that owned it. It became property of the Jesuits, which I'm not a big fan of. And we were abused. And I think that had to do with the programming.
Abused how?
Sexually.
Sexually abused?
Yep. In front of adults. Absolutely. We were brought, my school, many other Catholic schools, you would be bussed into the parking lot and we would be peeled off from the rest of the students, and we would be brought into another room where you could recognize Catholic school uniforms, but you could recognize it wasn't the uniform of our school. So we would enter this room, and there'd be girls from the other school, and they'd have their blouses off. The young girls, they have a T-shirt type thing on, and we would enter the room, and they would say, you know, it's okay. It's hot in here. You boys can take your shirts off too. Let me back up. When we first got split up from the crowd, we were told, make sure you take your snacks. And we were given snacks immediately and then brought around to this back end. I believe those were drugged because my recollection pretty much fades out when we were entering the room and we were told it was cool to also disrobe our tops. The room was a T-shaped room. So we would be entering from one section of disrobing children, and then to the other side, there was just a full room of adults just sitting in chairs, like observing. And I believe at that point that we were getting involved in some sort of show for these people, and that this was part of the remote viewing protocols, MK Ultra, whatever you want to call it. It was a way to dissociate the minds of children, to cause fragmentation, to then, once the mind is dissociated and fragmented, basically the original persona gets pushed to the back, and then the other, I call them like cubes, other rooms of opportunity is where they would then construct, and they would build, and they could make personalities. But there's a cause and effect, and they were trying to make the cause to get the effect.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.